was the moment I understood what my son-in-law had been planning all along. Not when I found the real estate listing on the computer at the library, not when the staff at Maplewood told me my family had requested my phone be held for safekeeping. It was earlier than that. It was the Tuesday afternoon he sat across from me at my own kitchen table, stirring his coffee slowly, and said, "Mum, you deserve to rest." The way he said deserve, like he was doing me a favor, like I should be grateful. I am 71 years old. I have lived in the same house in Guelph, Ontario for 38 years. My late husband Bernard and I bought it this spring. Our daughter Stephanie was born. A century home on a quiet street with a wraparound porch and a backyard maple that turns the most extraordinary shade of orange every October. We painted that house ourselves. We replaced the roof ourselves. We buried a dog in the backyard and planted a rose bush on top of her. That house is not just property, it is the architecture of my entire life. I should tell you how it started because people always ask, and I understand why. They want to know, how does a sensible woman end up somewhere she didn't choose to be? What did she miss? I didn't miss anything, I just trusted the wrong person. My daughter Stephanie has been married to Owen for 14 years. He is a financial planner, or he was, until his firm let him go 2 years ago, a detail Stephanie mentioned once and never again. I liked Owen well enough when they first married. He was attentive, well-dressed, remembered birthdays. Over time, though, I noticed things, the way he spoke over Stephanie in conversations, the way his eyes moved around my living room when he visited, cataloging. I told myself I was being an unfair mother-in-law. I told myself this was simply the arithmetic of aging. You become suspicious of comfort and attention because you've learned that things which seem too easy usually are. Last March, Stephanie called to say she was worried about me. I had slipped on the ice in January, nothing serious, a bruised hip. I was fine within 2 weeks. But she kept circling back to it. She said she and Owen had been talking. She said they thought it might be good for me to spend a few weeks at a wellness and recovery residence just outside of Cambridge. She called it a rest. She said the winter had been hard on me. She said I seemed tired. I was tired. I had just finished knitting 12 dishcloths for the church bazaar and was halfway through a sweater for my granddaughter. But I did not think that was the kind of tired she meant. Owen drove me. Stephanie said she had a work conflict. She works in hospital administration in Hamilton, and promised she would visit the following weekend. Owen was cheerful the entire drive. He had a podcast playing, something about investing. He carried my bag inside. He spoke to the woman at the front desk with great familiarity, I noticed, as though he had been there before. He introduced me, said I was transitioning into a restful new chapter, and smiled at me in a way that I can only describe as performed. The woman at the front desk, her name tag said Patrice, handed me a welcome folder. Owen said, "I'll let you two get acquainted," squeezed my hand and left. I stood in the lobby of Maplewood Retirement and Wellness Center and watched his car pull out of the parking lot. I want to be honest with you, I was not alarmed immediately. I was confused and perhaps a little stung, but I told myself this was Stephanie's way of caring. She'd always been anxious. Since childhood, she worried. This was, I decided, an extension of that worry. I would stay 2 weeks, I would rest, I would go home. That is what I told myself. My room was pleasant enough, a window facing the garden, a small desk, a bed with a white duvet that smelled like lavender detergent. My roommate, a woman named Opal who was 83 and had the sharpest wit I have encountered in years, told me within 20 minutes of my arrival that the Wednesday soup was the best thing they served and that the Thursday activities coordinator was insufferable. I liked her immediately. That first evening, I tried to call Stephanie to let her know I had arrived safely. That was when Patrice told me very gently, very professionally, that personal phones were held at the front desk for the first week as part of the adjustment protocol, to help residents settle in without distraction. I looked at her. "Whose policy is that?" I asked. "It's standard," she said, "for the first week." I handed over my phone because I did not yet understand what was happening. I handed it over because I am not the kind of person who makes a scene in lobbies. I handed it over because I still believed on some level that this was my daughter's well-meaning anxiety, not her husband's calculation. I was wrong. By the third day, I had begun to notice things that I could not explain away. Owen had not left an emergency contact number with me, only with the staff. When I asked Patrice to call Stephanie on my behalf, she said she would pass along the message. Stephanie did not call back that evening. I slept poorly. I watched the maple outside my window and thought about Bernard, who died 6 years ago, who always said I had better instincts than I gave myself credit for. He was right. On the fourth morning, I asked Opal if I could borrow her phone. She kept a small one tucked in her cardigan pocket, a very old flip phone her son had given her before he moved to Vancouver, pay-as-you-go, which the staff seemed unaware of. She handed it to me without a question. I stepped into the bathroom and called Stephanie. She answered on the third ring. She sounded surprised to hear from me, and then she sounded careful. That carefulness told me something. I asked her directly, "Stephanie, why am I here?" There was a pause. "Mum, you needed a rest." "For how long?" Another pause. "We're figuring that out." "We're figuring that out," I repeated. "What does that mean? What is being figured out?" She said Owen was handling some things. She said it was complicated. She said she would explain when she visited. "When are you visiting?" I asked. She said she wasn't sure. I stood in that bathroom with Opal's little flip phone, and I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. Not fear, something colder than fear. Clarity. The specific, terrible clarity of a person who finally understands the shape of what has been done to them. I asked Opal if I could use her phone once more. She said I could use it as many times as I liked. I called my lawyer. His name is Ted, and I have used him for 30 years since Bernard and I bought the house. He handled Bernard's estate. He drew up my will. He is 76, semi-retired, and answers his own phone, which I have always appreciated. I called his office number and he picked up himself, and I said, "Ted, it's Irene Gallagher. I need you to listen to me very carefully." I told him everything. I told him where I was, what I had been told, how long I had been there, and what Stephanie had said about things being figured out. I told him about my house, and I told him that I had signed nothing, that I was quite certain I had signed nothing, that I wanted him to check. Ted was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Irene, I'm going to make some calls. Don't sign anything. Don't let anyone tell you they need your signature on something routine. If anyone presents you with a document, tell them your lawyer has to review it first. Can you call me back tomorrow?" I said yes. I sat with Opal that afternoon and told her some of it. Not everything, but enough. She listened without interrupting, which is rare. When I finished, she folded her hands in her lap and said, "My daughter-in-law tried something similar with my GICs 3 years ago. I reported her to the bank." She said it the way you might say, "I reported a pothole." Utterly matter of fact. I asked her how she had stayed so calm. She said, "I was furious. I just decided not to show it until I had done something useful with it." That night, I could not sleep. I lay in the dark thinking about the house. I thought about the kitchen, where I have made Christmas dinner every year since 1987. The study where Bernard kept his books, still exactly as he left them. I have never been able to change them. The backyard maple, the rosebush over Bess. I thought about Owen sitting at my kitchen table saying the word deserve. I thought about all the things I had not let myself think before. When I called Ted the next morning, his voice had changed. He had done his calls. "Irene," he said, "someone has contacted your mortgage broker. There have been inquiries made about the property on your behalf, using your name." I sat very still. "Owen," I said. "I can't confirm who yet, but I want you to come back to Guelph. Today, if possible, I want to sit down with you and go through everything. Can someone bring you?" I thought about how to get out of Maplewood. I was not a prisoner, I reminded myself. I had committed no crime. I had signed nothing. I had no legal obligation to stay. The adjustment protocol was a residential guideline, not a court order. I was a woman who had walked in through the front door, and I could walk out the same way. I packed my bag that morning. I told Opal. She hugged me and slipped a piece of paper into my jacket pocket, her son's phone number in Vancouver, in case I needed a witness to anything, she said. I still have that piece of paper. I went to the front desk and told Patrice I was leaving. She looked uncertain. She said she would need to call my emergency contact. I said she was welcome to, but that I was an adult and a voluntary resident and I was leaving now. I asked for my phone back. She gave it back to me. I walked out into the March air, called a taxi on my own cell, and stood on the sidewalk outside Maplewood until the cab arrived. I called Ted from the cab. He had already contacted my bank's fraud prevention line. He had also spoken to a colleague who handles elder financial abuse cases, something I did not know was a specific area of law until that week, though looking back I should not be surprised. What Ted found over the following days was this. Owen had been making calls to my mortgage provider, my financial advisor, and a real estate agent in Guelph. He had represented himself as having power of attorney over my affairs on the basis of a document that, when my financial advisor actually requested a copy, turned out to be a draft, unwitnessed, unsigned by me, entirely invalid. He had simply been acting as though it existed. In some of those conversations, he had apparently implied that I was not managing well and that the family was taking over my affairs. He had not forged a signature. He had simply lied and banked on no one checking. Someone checked. I will not pretend that what came next was clean or simple. It was not. Stephanie called me crying. She said she had not known the extent of it, and I believe her partly, though I also believe she had allowed herself not to know, which is its own kind of failure. Owen had told her they were helping me. He had told her the house would be sold and the money invested, and that I would be comfortable at Maplewood long term. He had, apparently, been spending money they did not have, and my house had looked like a solution. I sat in Ted's office and listened to Stephanie cry on the phone, and I want to be honest, I felt grief more than I felt anger. The anger came later. In that moment, I grieved. I grieved for the daughter I raised who had let her husband make her afraid to talk to me. I grieved for the years of Sunday dinners and the trust I had extended without condition. I grieved for the version of Owen I thought I had known, the man who remembered birthdays. Then I dried my eyes and told Ted to do what needed to be done. He filed a formal complaint with the Ontario Securities Commission regarding the unauthorized representation of my financial affairs. He sent a letter to the real estate agent, who, to their credit, immediately ceased all contact with Owen once they understood the situation and confirmed there was no valid power of attorney on file. He sent a letter to the mortgage provider. He contacted the Guelph Police Service's Financial Crimes Unit. Owen was investigated. It took several months. He was not charged with fraud in the end. Ted explained that because no transaction had been completed and no document had been forged, the criminal threshold was difficult to meet. Though the unauthorized misrepresentation of having power of attorney over someone's affairs is absolutely a matter of civil liability, we pursued that. A settlement was reached. I will not say the number, but I will say it covered Ted's fees and then some. Owen and Stephanie separated 8 months after all of this. She called to tell me on a Sunday morning, and I listened, and I said the only thing I could honestly say, that I was sorry and that I was here. We are careful with each other now. Something was broken, and I do not know if it can be fully repaired. But she comes for Sunday dinner. Last October, she raked the maple leaves with me and we didn't talk about any of it, and that felt, in its own way, like a beginning. I want to say something to you because I think about who might be listening to this. When Owen dropped me at Maplewood and drove away, I was confused and a little hurt, but I was not helpless. I knew my lawyer's phone number by heart because I had known it for 30 years. I knew my own name on my own title deed. I knew that I had not signed anything, and I knew that mattered. That knowledge did not come from luck. It came from 38 years of handling my own affairs, paying my own bills, sitting with my own documents, understanding what I owned and what I owed and what my rights were. That is not a small thing. That is, I would argue, the most important thing. There are people, good, loving people, who hand everything over to someone else and trust it will be handled. I understand the impulse. But that trust, however well placed, can become a vulnerability if the person you handed things to changes or was never what you believed. Know your own accounts. Know your own lawyer's name. Know whether you have signed a power of attorney, and if so, know what it permits and what it does not. Know that in Canada, a power of attorney only has legal force when it is signed, witnessed, and notarized according to the laws of your province. A person claiming to have power of attorney over your affairs is not the same as a person who has it. I went back to my house on a Thursday afternoon in March, and I stood on the porch and looked at the street, and I thought about Bernard saying I had better instincts than I knew. I walked inside, I put the kettle on, I went into the study and sat in Bernard's chair and looked at his books. Then I called my granddaughter and asked if she wanted to come for dinner that weekend, because I had started a sweater and I needed to know if she wanted the collar ribbed or folded, and life, I have found, has a remarkable talent for continuing. I keep coming back to the maple in the backyard. Not the legal filings, not the settlement, not the phone calls, the tree. Because that is what all of it was really about. 38 years of a life built around something real, something rooted, and the quiet assumption that the people closest to you would never try to pull it out from under you. Owen counted on me being confused. He counted on me being grateful for the attention, deferential about the paperwork, slow to question a son-in-law who had always been polite at dinner. And I think about that, about how easy it would have been for that calculation to be correct. How many people in that situation would have waited, would have assumed there was an explanation, would have handed over the phone without asking whose policy it was. I was not lucky. I was prepared. And I want to be careful about that distinction, because it matters enormously. The preparation was not dramatic. It was decades of small, unglamorous habits, reading my own statements, sitting with my own lawyer, understanding what I had signed and what I had not. Bernard used to say that the most important documents in your life are the ones you read before you need them. He was right. When Ted asked me, that first phone call, whether I had signed a power of attorney, I knew the answer without hesitation. That certainty was not accidental. It was built, year by year, out of a kind of quiet self-respect, the decision that my own affairs were worth my own attention. That is what I would call the first thing. The foundation of it, the integrity of knowing your own life. Not in a grand sense, in the practical sense. The account numbers, the deed, the name of the person you trust with the documents that matter. Owen's plan collapsed, not because he was careless, but because I was careful. Those are different things, and one of them was entirely within my control. The second thing is harder to talk about, because it involves Stephanie. She is my daughter, and I love her, and what happened between her and Owen is a grief I will carry for the rest of my life. But I had thought about it honestly, and I think she knew on some level that something was wrong, and she let herself not know. That is a failure of a different kind. Not malice, something quieter and more corrosive. The willingness to let someone else do your thinking for you when the thinking is uncomfortable. I don't say that to condemn her. I say it because I recognize the temptation. It is easier to trust than to question. It is easier to believe in the good version of the people we love. But love without clear-eyed honesty is not the protection it feels like. It is a door left unlocked. And then there is what happened after, the standing up, the walking to the front desk, the calling of a cab in March in the cold with no certainty about what would happen next. I was frightened. I will not pretend otherwise. But I have learned over 71 years that fear is not the opposite of action. They can exist in the same moment. You can be afraid and still move forward. You can be grieving and still make the phone call. Opal taught me that, a little. That woman with her flip phone tucked in her cardigan, matter of fact about injustice in a way that comes only from having outlasted it more than once. She did not perform courage. She simply did not stop. Neither did I. The rose bush over Bess is blooming again this spring. Stephanie came on Sunday. We didn't talk about any of it, and somehow that was enough.